This is Computing Up, conversations about computation writ large with Michael Littman and Dave Ackley. This episode was recorded August 12th, 2021.
Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Computing Up, and our guest today is the one and only Michael Bowling. Michael, thanks a lot for coming and joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, so super cool. So Mike is a professor at the University of Alberta, but also a researcher at DeepMind. I guess also in Alberta, but like we often think of DeepMind as being located in London. And
is most of DeepMind in London?
Yes,
I mean,
that's the mothership, as far as I can tell.
That is sometimes it's called that. Yeah, but there's now.
How many satellites are there?
There are 4 or 5. Yeah, Montreal, Paris, Edmonton, Mountain View. We've had a location for a while, but connected with Alphabet and Google, of course.
Right.
And I think New York now too.
Wow.
Now, Mike, I think I've known you now too long because I have so many things that I like to talk with whenever I get to see you. And yes. I don't know if we're going to get to cover all of them, but we'll go a little bit chronologically. So I first became aware of what you were up to. You're a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon, where I had briefly been a graduate student, and Dave also got his PhD from Carnegie Mellon. So we all have that sort of in common, but we were none of those. No pair of us was there at the same time. I think I just barely missed you because I think transferred. And but you were doing really interesting work in the space of AI and games, and especially applied in robotics to things like RoboCup. And so you were doing some pretty cool work building robots that can play soccer.
RoboCup.
Right, RoboCup is like It's the name comes from RoboCop, but it's about like World
Cup,
like World Cup soccer. Yeah, okay. It was at the time that it was named. That was a really relevant reference, and it's not anymore.
I'm not sure it was relevant even when it was named.
Pretty
but go
sure
on.
It was. Yeah.
Well, it's only one letter off. I mean.
RoboCup. So the goal of RoboCup is by the year 2050.
It sounds like RoboCup when you say it.
Well, maybe I have bad pronunciation. Is to build a team that could challenge and beat the human World Cup champions by like 2050, and so and that's been the goal since the beginning. It's going on. It's almost halfway done, I think.
Yeah, that's right. It will be in next year. I
mean, couldn't you beat the U.S. team just by having a bunch of snow plows that just go across the field and push the ball down into the goal? I mean, what are the rules? I mean, if you're a robot, you can't be more massy than a human or something? What's the rules?
I think
to make it
fair? I don't know that they set them all down in stone, but I think the premise was that the form factor would have to match a human form factor.
I see.
But yeah, if you imagine putting a cannon on one of these, like no goaltender's going to stand in the way of that shot.
Yeah, exactly. A rail gun that you put the soccer ball on and just blow a hole through everybody until it gets to the goal. Anyway.
Okay,
I mean,
right,
one of the things that RoboCup has really pioneered has actually been humanoid robotics. Like that's also been something that's been very tied to RoboCup since the very beginning. So I think the premise is to, again, if the human team isn't willing to play, then we don't get to beat them. So I think it has to be
these RoboCup things are really like humanoid on 2 feet trying to do it?
They have a bunch of leagues, a bunch of kind of sub competitions that take place, and one of them is humanoid, but it's humanoid like 18 inches high kind of thing.
I've seen some of that on YouTube.
Yeah, so those are pretty fun to watch, and they have.
But they're not gonna beat Pele anytime soon.
No, but they're like each year they try to make it a little bit more
20
open.
inches next year.
No. That's called the standard platform league. So it's not that it's humanoid; it's that everybody has the same robots. In some of the other leagues, the people actually get to build their own robots. Yeah, and so there's like the mid-size robots league, and they actually use a pretty reasonable like human-sized soccer ball. And so each year since I think 2016 or so, they actually do a little match between the best robot team and some of the researchers who happen to be there. And it's still the case that
it hasn't been close.
It has not been close. I mean, I think they've scored. The robots have scored, but these are people in their researcher clothes, just like casually kicking to each other and like showing off for the cameras and stuff. It's not close yet. But they have been getting.
It was an own goal.
No, yeah, that can happen.
Bounced it off a robot.
There are two elements that both progress needs to happen on both of them, and one is a robotics push to how do we build appropriate robots that can operate in space nearby to humans and have the same kind of power and speed, but also without damaging them. Like that's a simultaneously as we see, say, Boston Dynamics like making advances, like RoboCup has been alongside that, making their own advances in more reliability in robots. I think that's one of the great things that RoboCup has done. Is I remember when I started as a graduate student, if you went to a robotics lab at a university and said, "Show me what you got," the odds are they'll tell you, "My robots don't work right now. They're being fixed." And 5 years later, I think largely because of RoboCup, you walked into a robot lab in a university and they'd show you something because we had to pick our robots up, travel across the world, and have them play. And a lot of robustness started to get building into robotics because of it.
When I was at Carnegie Mellon, my office mate was working in Mark Rabert's lab, keeping the one-legged hopping robot hopping like that. And that robot pretty much lived in the hospital and came out for a video and then went and went back to the hospital. But they didn't go up like that. And yeah, I mean, I think, one thing I guess I really like about robotics, period, is the spatial embodiment aspect of it, and that you can't really avoid that. Now you can put it in a roll cage or something and say, keep the humans out, so the robot can accelerate at 4Gs to do whatever it is. But it's much better, just as you say, to say, well, how do you do something so that a human wouldn't be insane to let this thing occupy space with it like that. And I guess, as you say, RoboCop could have been a big piece of that. Although I guess the interacting with humans is really kind of just a sort of add-on at the end. But the robustness is what you're talking about.
I think the robustness of keeping robots running is a big part of that.
Right.
Now, I don't think you're doing robot stuff now. Are you still kind of give a finger in at all?
I think I'm more of a cheerleader observer. Maybe is if a researcher can be that I'm ready to step in at a moment's notice, maybe, but happy to watch the people. There's a certain frustration with Michael, you know this very well. There's a certain frustration with robots that it's hard to matter. It's hard to figure out how to make science go forward fast when the robot's in the hospital a lot.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we had an issue. One of my graduate students, Bethany Leffler, she discovered late in her dissertation that which run it was of the robot since the batteries were installed mattered a lot. And so ultimately we ended up we would use batteries once and then throw them away. It was incredibly wasteful, but it meant that we had nice, consistent, charge going through the robots. And so it wasn't doing less weird, unpredictable things.
Wow.
I'm slightly probably jumping ahead your timeline, but when I started and I left Carnegie Mellon and went to the University of Alberta, one of the projects going on at the University of Alberta was the poker project, which I'm sure I'll say a little bit more about this, but I just wanted to tie this in to say, when I started working on that, I was worried that there would be a large engineering effort just to be able to understand the game. Let me say what I mean by engineering here, just that we would spend a lot of time not on what I would say would be the artificial intelligence problem, but just like building enough infrastructure to be able to play the game at scale that you would need to. And I said to myself, if it ever gets worse than RoboCup, then I'll quit. I'm not going to work on it. And I sort of, that was my dilemma. I sort of left RoboCup because I felt like the balance was hard. You spent a lot of time just keeping the robots running and not a lot of time feeling like you were getting at the hard research questions. And I think that's why I started to shift away. And then I did some robotic stuff for a while after that, but it definitely dwindled over time just because I felt like I could make more progress without having to deal with batteries and dead robots.
You did your poker playing things doesn't have to flip actual physical cards around, or does it?
No, we did talk about seeing if we could get an Aibo, one of the robot dogs, to play poker, so then we could have nice. Robot dogs playing poker, but so recreate the iconic
the experience.
Yeah.
But did you start from video of the cards, or just it's a king of clubs?
No, I think one of the things that helped make this nice was right at the time you have the explosion of online poker. And so poker players themselves were getting used to, I am playing poker mediated through a computer anyway.
I see.
So almost by the time we were competing against top professional players,
there was an API.
That was, they were used to it. Like they were almost as used to as much as that as, there's a frustration about dealing the cards. Like, you deal out the cards, everyone goes fold, 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 someone takes the pot, and then the dealer has to pull all the cards in and shuffle them and wait to deal the hand out again. They're happy to just say, let's skip that and, just have cards appear in front of me too.
Yeah, so that's exactly where I wanted to go next. So you graduated, you got your PhD, and you took a faculty position at the University of Alberta, which I think one of the big claims to fame of the department there is playing games at the level where they're challenging the best people in the world at those games. So Jonathan Schaefer put a lot of energy into checkers, and remarkable story
first
there.
Program ever to win a world championship at a game against humans.
Yeah. Schaefer was at Alberta?
Yep. Yeah. And in 1994, 2 years before Deep Blue.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I didn't know that. Uh-huh.
And there was an active poker program going on there when you arrived, but pretty quickly you got deeply involved in that work. And so what drew you into that, and what do you feel like what did you come away with? What's the status of that effort?
Sure. Because it's been a long time, and I feel like it ran its course. Like it's not an ongoing story. It is a mostly finished one. So what excited me, I think. Coming out, I guess we didn't really dive into the work I was doing around learning for multiple robots, but I sort of loved this idea of that we would be able to have robots or other agents that don't have a physical body, but they would be able to interact and learn from that interaction about how to play games, how to do some of these little, like one of the videos, I guess, that made me slightly famous as a grad student was I had this video of two physical robots that were playing keep away. The one was trying to tag the other one, and the other one was trying to get away from them. And this, like, you could actually see them like deke each other out. Like they'd go one way and then switch directions, and this would cause the robots trying to grab them to run the wrong way, and they'd spin around them. And like seeing these sort of very human, like how you would play tag with somebody happening just through learning, I think was really compelling. And
I use that in my class all the time. So that really was a great video, just tremendous.
Yeah, so I sort of love this idea that you would just get, robots could learn these complex multi-agent interactions just through learning. And poker felt like great. It embodies exactly that. It has ambitious goals, the same way that the
checkers.
Yeah, the same way that RoboCup has an ambitious goal, maybe less ambitious, because we'd probably get to poker before we would get to beating a World Cup team. But like it isn't just that we'll do this and we'll be done next year. And at the same time, we don't have to deal with physical robots. That we can just have the rules of the game, play out the cards through computers. So I was originally sort of taking some of the techniques that I had sort of played with at CMU and let's see where they could go inside of poker. And when I was at CMU, I was also sort of sidling closer and closer to game theory, and how that as a mathematical formalism could really drive things forward. And it turns out that is really timely. Like right as I was arriving, the sort of thinking about poker not as a search problem, not as you would think about it as checkers, but thinking how you would think about poker from a game theory point of view was the thing. And so then that was an area I had expertise in. And so just over the next 2 years, the percentage of projects that I had my fingers in and the percentage of projects that, say, Jonathan had his fingers in just started to shift towards mine. And then Jonathan got more involved in some administrative responsibilities and then asked me, why don't you just take over the group? And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to let you down, but sure, I'll do it.
Cool.
So what are some of the highlights of what the poker group accomplished? Because some of them are just remarkable.
One I'll start with was, and I think this is an important point, but a little bit small, was sort of popularizing this research to a broader group of people. So we started the annual computer poker competition that runs at AAAI, the main AI conference, sort of primarily in North America, but it's more international now. And I think that both got, like, at its heyday, we would have 50 to 60 entries from 20 different countries. all playing hands of poker against each other. I'm sure in that competition, we might have been playing close to the number of hands that humans were playing of this game, or getting close to it. That drove a ton of research. So often competitions, you see this in RoboCup, right? Once you sick grad students on the go beat this other team of grad students, a crazy amount of innovation happens. And so new algorithms were being literally invented every year as people were the arms race of who could get closer to playing a better game of poker. In 2007, we sort of felt like we could take on the smallest variant of poker that humans play. So this is heads up, meaning it's just two players. You're just playing against one other player, and the limit game. So when you make a bet in this game, the bet size is fixed. It's determined by the rules of the game ahead of time. So you don't choose how much you're going to bet. You just choose if you're going to bet. And then all the rest of it, you can raise and call and all the other things. And we organized an event at AAAI, again, the main AI conference. And we took we got Phil Locke, a prominent poker pro, and we asked him to find a partner. We did this against partners, which maybe I should say a tiny bit why. We played what we call duplicate poker, something that actually has happened a little bit with the human game, but it's not very common, where so basically the program would play against one of the humans, and in another room where they couldn't talk to each other, the program would play against the other human, but the cards, with the same cards being dealt, but reversed. So if the human got one set of cards, the program in the other room would get that set of cards. So it's very much like duplicate bridge, if anyone's familiar with that. And sure. The idea is this takes away some of the luck of the game. If the human's getting most of the good cards, then the program's going to get most of the good cards on the other side. So we ran this competition. Half of it was done live in front of an audience, and the other half was done in the hotel room where they couldn't talk to each other. We played 5 matches. Each one was 500 hands. 4 matches, and each one was 500 hands. And we drew the first match. We won the second match, and this made us very excited. And then we proceeded to lose the next 2. But
you won a match.
But we won a match, so it was really exciting. I could tell more stories from that, but...
was I the referee of that game?
You were. You're right. You were. Why did I not think of that? You were the referee.
There's a connection there.
In some sense, maybe this was, if what we wanted was more publicity, like maybe it was good to lose that because we got to do it again.
Set things up.
And so in the next year, in 2008, we organized a second match. We actually played against a number of different poker pros, including now what was well known to be the best in the world at Heads Up Limit. He was regularly playing where his bet sizes was $1,000 on a given bet. So that means like on every night, like a night of him playing poker was him probably winning or losing my annual salary. So that was wow. Matt Horolenko.
So, and again, that's just a property of the game. You sit down and say, I'm going to play a limit 1,000 bets, and then that's what the bet is.
That's right. You agree on what the size of the bet is in the limit game, and
it's
so
like
you could be playing where every bet
whatever.
is like a penny, and that of course you could win a few cents, a dime here or there, or you could be playing where every bet's for $1,000 or $2,000, and that's what he played online. If you can find people
to sit down with you, right.
So we played in Vegas this time. We went to we had them on they were on our home turf, so we went to their home turf. It was during the World Series. And
I did not get to be the referee of that one. I didn't get to go to Vegas. Or if I did, I'm not going to tell you because what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Right.
I'm going to tell you about one of the things that happened was we won. Oh, I'm trying to remember now. I think we won 3 matches and drew 1 and lost 2, I think. Now, one of the things that's going on at the same time is we're actually building sort of mathematical techniques that can help evaluate the luck that happens in one of these games. So while we still play these duplicate games where that removes some of the luck, it doesn't remove all of it, because you might have a hand where it's a mediocre hand.
If someone throws 1 card, the other person throws 2 cards, now you've diverged.
That's right. It's very quick that you can diverge in terms of the luck. So we started developing these techniques that would actually allow you to subtract off in a totally unbiased way sort of who got the better end of this luck. After the fact, when we ran it on that first match, we might have actually been ahead of Phil Luck and Ali Islami in the first match. Our analysis came back and said, we were statistically significantly ahead on 2 of the matches and drew the other 2. Like they were too tight to call within the other 2. And the other one, I think we won. The human
caught some luck there.
That's right. And then the other one, we were ahead by I think 4 out of the 6, and the other one was too close to call. So it definitely, that moment, like it's hard to say, like trying to get statistical significance on this. It's definitely sometime between 2007 2008. Computers surpassed humans at that is one variant, the smallest variant that humans play.
So in this particular one, the Texas whole face up limit.
Yeah, you got it. You nailed it.
That
face off.
Is it the case that once you figure it all out, there's no psychology, there's no edge in figuring out what the other person's going to do? Are they bluffing or not? You just strictly do some probability distribution and draw from it, and poof, off you go. That's pretty much it. I do want to give some clarity. Some people interpret that meaning like, does that mean your bot doesn't bluff? And like, no, absolutely, it bluffs. But that's just all folded into the distribution.
That's right. It's folded into the distribution, and bluffing falls out of the mathematics of the game. That bluffing is required to play the game well. It needs to call the opponent's bluffs because it needs to, in order to be able to play well. Now, with that said, the actual bot that played in 2000, so in 2007, we had developed this technique of building different styles of how the program could play. It was actually kind of cute how we did this. We actually sort of lied to the program while it was training. So it's sitting there. It trains in this very much learning sort of way. This is what I wanted to bring to the table. I wanted it to learn by playing against itself, much like that robots that played tag. So it would learn to play against itself. But while it was doing that, we lied to it, and we told it, when you win a pot, you're going to win 7% more than you put in. So that means like, it's starting to think, wait, I'm not, like it wants to risk because it's not going to lose on the risk. So this lie, while it was being trained, it still plays game theoretically sound in some sense, but just a little bit like pushy, a little bit like, I'm going to bet more and put you into a tough position. That was, so when we got to the conference, we didn't have any mechanism. We actually developed a few of these different strategies. We called them colors. You might remember this, Michael. The poker players,
they were all along that one dimension of upping the payoff or lowering it.
We did. We played with that under different circumstances. Like maybe when you call, we'll change it differently than when you raise or something.
I see. So not necessarily just across the board. It could be this aspect of the game get more bold about or more chicken.
That's right. And then the poker players we played against, they wanted to know if we were going to change the bot that they were playing against. They wanted to know who is it? Like, who's sitting across from me? So we decided we'd give them names.
That's funny.
We decided we'd give them names, and we named them after the characters in Reservoir Dogs. So the first
Mr.
one, the first one they went up against was Mr. Pink, and then they went up against Mr. Orange, and Mr. Orange was the tilty one. He was the one who was a little crazy and a little aggressive, and that was the one that actually beat them in the second match.
So you weren't allowing yourself to change hats during a match.
So during the third competition, we decided, because it was very new and we weren't so certain about this, we turned on the mechanism that was going to try to figure out what to do during a match. Is appropriate
against this guy.
That's right. And in the third match, we lost. And we sat down as a team and we're going, what do we do for match 4? Like, we didn't really like how that went. We looked at some options.
Mr. Orange.
And then we were talking about Mr. Orange, and we thought, I don't know, maybe we just play for a draw, because like if we get a draw in the whole thing, and Mr. Pink is the one that is the most game theoretically sound. That was the one trained to be game theoretically sound. So we put in Mr. Pink, and we lost. And I regretted that to this day. Like I felt like I should have gone with the one that adapted, is what I said to myself. So anyway, the next year, we exactly put in an adaptive system, and we were ahead going into the last match, and we had one more match to go, and we had the exact same competition, exact same question: do we turn off this learning bit? Do we keep it on? Do we play the sort of safe one? And I was like, keep it on, because I do not want to take I don't want my human knowledge to have made me make a mistake. So we left on the adaptation and we won. So that felt like I was vindicated on the let the bot do its thing.
Well, and I would think, if you can change it on the fly, well, then that's another human element that would go into it, that would need to be disclosed in order to be fair. That saying, rather than the human doesn't know which color they're playing against because a human behind the scenes is changing colors on it, then that would be a little
so when the human was behind the scenes,
Turk.
when the human was behind the scenes, we sort of said, okay, we have to tell them what we chose.
Right.
When the bot's doing it itself, then it's just like them deciding, I'm going to be aggressive now, or
absolutely.
I'm going to be cautious.
Then it's just more of the program running.
That's right.
That's
how we envisioned it. I think
cool.
this really freaked out the players, though. Like once the players knew the bot was adapting, then I think this gave us an edge, not just because the bot was adapting. I think it gave us an edge because humans started trying to do all of this, like, double recursive reasoning around, like, oh, well, I'm going to do this, and that's going to make the bot think this. And I'm just like, the whole time I'm hearing them, because when they played, because they played in a way that their cards were visible to the audience, right? The bot doesn't get to see them because it's mediated over the computer. So they could talk through. They can say anything they want to. The bot's not listening. And so whenever they would make these statements, that it was like, yeah, you just keep thinking exactly that. That is not helping you at all.
Digging yourself a hole.
Well, my guess would be that the different adaptations would be in small percentages. And if you're going to then think, oh, I fooled him into thinking to be aggressive, so now I'm going to be super cautious or whatever it is, you're going to overswing. You're going to diverge too far away from the Mr. Pink winning strategy, and that the adaptations of the robots are really not that big. Is that true? The swings in probability that the adaptation is making?
I think we tried to push it harder than that, because the downside if you make the swings very small is that it's very hard for you to tell when you do that, when you're doing your own adaptation, is this better than this? So we actually made them, I don't want to say they were large, but they were significant. They were significant to be noticeable, so the program could ask itself, like, is it this better than if I play this more cautious one?
Cool. Well, and this is a question, I've wondered about for a while, because I remember the publicity about the hold up limit and the humans are beaten and all that stuff. And, once again, forget it. So how much of the poker theory behind all of these things goes out the window in No Limit?
I didn't really say much around the technology that's behind it, but the technology that was behind it was, you had sort of said, once you sort of solve this, do we just then have a probability distribution? And then I brought up that, well, we do have these sort of styles of play. But within one of those styles, we do just have a big table that is a probability distribution. So what happens is, while it's training, it's going off playing thousands of hands against itself. And then it comes back and says, okay, in this situation, I'm just going to raise 33% of the time. That's it. And there's a big table that tells it what to do. And while it's playing, it just says, okay, here's the situation. Look in the table. Flip the coins necessary to sample from the probability distribution. And so then the way we approached that was through this notion of abstraction. So the idea was we couldn't solve the whole game of heads up limit. Even the smallest game that humans could play, we couldn't have the program have a table big enough to store the entire game. So we basically just shoved situations together. We were just like, and we didn't actually put like ace king and king queen together, but it was like that. We would take two situations that are distinct, and we'll just say, you have to play them the same way. You don't get to treat them differently. And then we'd solve that abstract game because we made it small enough. We put enough stuff together that we went from something that has like 10,000 million different decisions that you're in and got it down to, like only 10 million different decisions that you'd be in.
So wait, so you're saying you made human programmers, the researchers made equivalence classes over hands, such that it was small enough to make a table of probabilities for those equivalence classes.
Yes, with the only exception being they were not, the equivalence classes were also sort of discovered by a computer program.
Okay, all right. So there was a two-part
that's right.
statistics estimation or something like that. One saying this is probably interesting, so I'm going to make a row in the probability distribution for it, then the other one to decide how much to go with it, that. But theoretically, it was all automated once the bugs were out.
Yeah, that's right. And then so there was one process that would build that abstraction, that set of equivalence classes, and then in that now new game, because this is like a new poker game that humans don't play, it would go and outright solve that, and then it would try to use that strategy in the full game. So
the equivalence class is necessarily some heuristic process.
That's right. We did not optimally find the best set of equivalence classes, and in fact, really one of the extra milestones before we hop into No Limit, one of the other milestones that we sort of hit was in 2015. So this is now 8 years after beating humans at Heads Up Limit. We came out to solve Heads Up Limit. It was shortly after that I remember, I don't know, sitting at a restaurant when I think it was Jonathan asked me, like, super congratulations on what you did with the team. This is great. Could you solve the game? Could you just go solve it? Because it was right around the time that we had done poker. It was 2007. Jonathan solved checkers, solved it. So now no longer is it just better than humans, but cannot lose a game, because found out that can provably show that you can get a draw from the opening position and can guarantee that it gets there. And so could we solve poker? So then that just sat in my head and sat in the team's head for a while. We took 3 shots at it at various times under various different whole techniques for doing it. The final one that worked was we outright just solved the 10 million billion positions. And we stored
without the equivalence
no equivalence classes. The table is 6 gigs compressed. 6 terabytes compressed.
Sweet.
Yeah. And the whole process was, I said, if this got to be too much engineering, this one had a lot of engineering. It wasn't so much anymore. It wasn't so much anymore about the AI. We had the algorithm already. It was about how can you play enough hands of poker to train a 6 terabyte table to understand every position. And we ran on, we had 400 nodes of a compute cluster. There was 40 CPUs on every node, in that ballpark, running for 2.5 months. They played poker just straight for 2.5 months. Our estimate was it played more poker than all of humanity combined in the history of humanity. But it solved
to making one Bitcoin. And
okay.
Wow.
So No Limit. So what happens? You can take these ideas to No Limit, and there was I mentioned the annual computer poker competition that had a No Limit competition inside of it, and that's what people were doing. We were typically winning that competition year after year.
And just for context, that's when people win the world championship of poker. That's the version of the game that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, that is. That's not.
It's not Heads Up until the end, right?
Yeah, it's tricky. The World Series of Poker has 40 odd different events. They actually are playing many different variants. It's not even all Texas Hold'em. The main event of the World Series of Poker is a No Limit tournament, which has 2 properties that's different than what we were playing in our computer games. One was the stack sizes can change. I might have 300 chips and you have 30,000 chips and I still have to play. And then if I win 1,000 of your chips, then now I have those thousands and you don't. And we keep playing until everyone's busted but one person and they win. We were playing in exactly the sort of end of that comes down to 2 players. So we were playing that, and we were simplifying things a little bit for our computers, and that we would reset the stacks. So
even stacks at the beginning.
And even stacks. And if I won half your chips on the next hand, I will just, we'll make a little tally. I'll say I won this from you, and I'll hand you back your money, and we'll play again. So that every hand was an
6 terabytes wouldn't have done it.
Well, even without
if you had to condition on the stack sizes.
Even without that, the game of No Limit, because you can make any bet size, we were playing with stacks of, I'm trying to remember right, I think it was 10,000 chips. So that means you could make a bet of 7, or you could make a bet of 7,312, and that's a different bet than 7,312.
And the probability is different.
Yeah.
And probability is different. So this game has 10 to the 160 decision points in it. So for Limit, it was 10 to the 15. That's what we solved. This has 10 to the 160. And so what we were doing with this 10 to the 160 is we were doing abstraction. We would put states together until we got down to something that was about the size of 10 to the 13 or 10 to the 14. And then we solved that. But now how many things did we put together? Well, we put 10 to the 140 things together.
All the rest of the orders of magnitude.
That's right. We put whole universes. We took every atom in the universe and we're like, let's just call that one atom. And then we did that again. So one of the things that
now, wait a minute. I'm confused now. So we did the equivalence classes when you were solving limit, and then you said, no, we don't need equivalence classes to solve limit. We'll have 6 terabyte database. And now you're saying you put the equivalent classes back in again to
so
do no limit.
That's right.
Like that.
With no sense. There's no chance we're going to be able to drop the equivalence classes for no limit.
Yeah, okay. All right, I got it. And so you might say, you either bet 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 and nothing in between. That would be an example
of
an equivalence
in
class.
Worst case, that's right. And in worse than that is we only think the opponent can bet those things too.
Right.
And so if the opponent comes and bets, like let's suppose the smallest bet I think they can make is 500 and they come and bet 5, then I don't have any choice but to say, let's pretend they bet 500.
Right. Right.
And so there was this question about how big is that hole? Like how bad could that be? And there was
far off, yeah.
There was a paper that came out that came up with a technique to. Ideally, we'd like to measure how bad could we beat one of these programs. We called this exploitability. Like if I got to figure out I could optimally play against you and do exactly what you don't want me to do. How much could I take your money? How much money could I take from you? And we can't. That computation is too difficult in the game of no limit for the same reason. But you could try to approximate it. And so we came up with this little clever technique that sort of took advantage of the fact that, well, maybe I won't dive into details, but we called it this sort of approximate. It was this approximate best response. It was approximating how exploitable you could be. And it lower bounded it. It knew you were at least this exploitable because it was going to actually beat you for this much. And we started running it against what are the state of the art bots. Now, so we always measure poker winnings and milla big blinds because we're scientists and geeky. So, we have to use the metric system. So, but to give you context, a thousandth of a big blind. So to give you context, if you were to play poker and fold every hand, just don't look at your cards, just fold. Just every single hand you fold. Then on the even numbered hands, you'll lose 500 milla big blinds. On the odd number hands, you lose 1,000, so you lose 750. The programs that were winning the computer poker competition were on average exploitable for about 4,000 milla big blinds. Meaning they were playing so badly, they should just stop and just start folding their hands. That would be better than what they're doing.
Wow.
But it's only better if they're playing against the super genius that can actually exploit them. And the fact of the matter is they're not, because everybody's having trouble with this game.
That's right. So when they were playing against other computer poker programs who also couldn't interpret these bets, but then there became this arms race. Like you actually saw bots, people writing programs that are going to be like, I'm going to make like a common bet size would be to bet the current amount that's in the pot. There are certain game theoretic reasons why that's a bet size that poker players think about. And so like when we were programming them in, we were choosing bet sizes like that. But like, we don't want to do that. Like we should bet weird bet sizes, like bet 1.723 times the pot, because maybe that'll mess up the other program. So like that was where this was going, which also feels very ineffective if we're trying to discover, AI principles for how to make decisions in these spaces.
Well, I mean, it certainly seems like if you're going to bucket bet sizes, then there is an edge to be had if you know what the other person's buckets are.
Yeah. That's right.
And you can bet $1 more than is going to count in a bucket or $1 less and get to presumably the worst part of the approximation.
Yep. We had a legitimate research effort on trying to identify the buckets that the opponents were using in an attempt that we could
exploit them.
Yeah.
I mean, this feels like it's going all the way back for me to when I was at Carnegie Mellon and working on the backgammon program with Hans Berliner, that had just beaten the world champ in an exhibition game, the year before I got to, Carnegie Mellon in 87 or something like that. And Hans was all about, avoiding those kind of edge effects in the evaluation functions and how to make everything go smoothly between thinking you're in bucket 1 and bucket 2 rather than having a hard edge between them exactly to avoid those kind of blemishes.
So you can go find papers that talk about this. There was soft bucketing. This was it was a big advance in the sense that it would help you win competitions. It was not a big advance in that I don't know that we learned anything about AI from having done this. But
I don't know if Hans really cared. I mean, he just wanted to win games because it was cool.
Yeah. That certainly worked. That certainly drove some of the research in the poker competition. I would say it's not the majority of it. Like I bring that up as an exception because I think I think the poker competition is one of the great success stories of where competitions have driven real research and real understanding. And I don't think that's one of that example of soft bucketing is not my favorite example of that. But these game solving algorithms have been that.
What are your favorite examples? What has poker taught us that makes society a better place?
Well, that was a big step from poker games to society's a better place.
Let's flip over all the cards.
Could I say, like, what have we learned that's, like, scientifically general? Could I start with that?
All right. Yeah. Step by step.
So there's a technique called counterfactual regret minimization, and
counterfactual regret minimization. Okay.
And it's how our agents, when they do that self-play training, it's the mechanism that they're using, and basically what they're reasoning through is, when I like it, they're playing games against themselves, and as they play, they're asking questions like, okay, if I had done this differently, suppose I called here instead of folded, how much more money would I have made, and how much regret do I have then for not having done that? And then that is how they adapt their strategy on every iteration.
And when they ask a question like that, then they answer it by doing a rollout or something. Then they go ahead and try.
They're essentially, they're actually sort of working through they're playing many, many hands to answer exactly that question. So they're rolling through the possibilities of what could happen. And especially because they're doing this in self-play, they're doing this playing against themselves, they can much more explicitly ask that. They can answer that question very explicitly. They can actually say, well, if I would have called here, then here's in fact what would have happened, because I know what I would have done because I'm playing against myself.
I see. Right. So in fact, you only have to do one continuation as long as you don't have another decision, because this is what will happen.
Now the cool thing about these regret ideas is, and this was a really exciting theoretical advance, is that you would normally think about, okay, what do I have to store regret for? I have to store regret for, you sort of alluded to it, if I have multiple decisions in a row that I could be making, then I have to store regret for, like, there's an exponential number of, like, sequences of decisions.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at every possible strategy, there's like doubly exponential on the number of decisions you have, possible strategies that you could play. The cool thing about CFR, counterfactual regret minimization, is that you can actually only have to think about and reason about a polynomial number of regrets to actually ensure that you have no regret with respect to the doubly exponential number of strategies. So it turned this looks like an intractable problem to all you actually have to do is store a single number for every decision and every action you could make from that decision. And so
because you're playing against yourself, that's the leverage?
It's actually, the leverage comes from the structure of the game. It actually comes from, I don't just have to think about how, if I took this action, what else I could do from there. Because what's actually happening is sort of the way the mathematics works out, because this is a tree structure. The game has a tree structure to it. I make this decision, then I make this decision, then you make this decision, and so on. That tree structure means that instead of thinking about all the ways that I could play to finish the game from here, I only have to think about how I would immediately play to improve myself, because I am thinking about how to improve myself underneath those decisions too. And so it turns out your overall regret over any possible of the doubly exponential ones is bounded by, getting awfully mathematical here, but I'll say it anyway, the sum of your regrets at every decision point. And so it doesn't grow with the exponential of the things you're comparing to. It only grows with the sum of your decision points. So you are paying a loss. That's right. You are paying a loss because you are not directly thinking about how you would play from here on out. But you can bound that by the regrets that you're storing at all the places that are the decisions you're about to make.
And that's true of any tree structured game?
Yeah. So there's a notion of called an extensive form game, and this property holds in the extensive form game. So this applies to, like, we could run our algorithms in perfect information games. We could run this in backgammon too. CFR can learn to produce optimal strategies without search, just through, again, playing against itself and storing these regrets and adapting its policy from regrets. It's a little bit more like reinforcement learning than the traditional search approaches. And
if positions can recur, so the game can be unbounded, that doesn't matter?
I mean, okay, when you have a game that can reoccur and forever, then you have a problem that, like, what value do you assign to a game that never ends? So, like, game theory doesn't have something to answer here, which is why...
Right, just to clarify here, so we're talking about the like a game where you can repeat a situation. So, like, I flip a card and you flip it back. Backgammon could get into
a hitting battle, and you just keep on sending guys further and further back.
Okay, so that one I think it would handle just fine, because it is Markovian, and there's some probability, like, there's no probability that it will go on forever.
just because we trust the dice are honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a worst case sense in which it goes on
That's right.
forever.
And that's fine. Then we can live.
Okay.
We can live with that. We just need it to be that with regardless of the strategies, there has to be there can be not a non-zero probability that the game never ends. That's bad.
Okay.
Which, by the way, as just an aside, did you know that 2-player Monopoly, there's something like a 17% chance that under optimal play that the game never ends?
Cool.
So if you ever played a game...
It always felt like that to me.
Yeah, if you ever played a game of Monopoly, it's like, and you said, I'm just going to quit because I don't think it's ever going to end. You might have been right. You might have still been playing that game to this day.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, all right. Okay. Well, so I still don't really understand. I mean, is there an example of a game or anything, a situation where this isn't true? Where this that gets you the CFRM?
I mean, I always ask him about Stratego, right? So there's this game that's kind of like chess, but it's also kind of like poker because you hide the identity of
hidden information.
Yeah, and as far as I know, this doesn't actually work for Stratego. Is that right, Mike?
That's interesting.
What do you mean?
Or
by
it doesn't scale well? Okay, fair enough.
So here's the challenge. Like if you're looking for the weakness, it actually works in Stratego. Like the statements that I made all hold in Stratego. The problem is, much like No Limit Poker, there's more than 10 to the 160. And I said that your regret is bounded by the sum of your regrets at every decision. Well, if your regrets at every decision is intractable to calculate, now you're going to function approximation, and we have to do something about that. We have to compress or approximate in some ways, and that's been a bit of a struggle. So, and this is why No Limit happened, and No Limit didn't immediately follow because
I get it.
We didn't know how to deal with the when the equivalence classes didn't work because there was too many things in an equivalence class. That was the next struggle. So. If I sort of continue, you switch me. There's two threads I could go down,
Sorry.
which is like the social good thread. So these counterfactual values, maybe I'll say this: the counterfactual values are actually not just algorithmically cool; they appear to be fundamental. So what do I mean by that? It turns out that so in a game like backgammon or chess or Go or any of these perfect information games, when you're at a particular state, if I just told you, here's the position of the board, here's all your checkers on the board where they are. That's enough that you can just say, oh, I know how to play out the game from here. Like there is an optimal way to play out the game from here. There's a value of the state. Like is this a win, loss, or a draw? I mean, in backgammon, it's going to be probabilistic, like it's going to be an expectation.
Right.
But there's an answer to that. In poker, if I were to say, okay, there's $10 in the pot, you're holding an ace king, there's an ace king 7 on the board, what do? You can't answer that question. There is no answer of what to do. There's no optimal value to that state. And the reason there isn't is because you don't know what distribution the opponent is holding at this position. And that's not enough too. So even if I told you, oh, they're holding these, this is the distribution of our cards, that's not enough because you now need to know, what do they think I'm holding right now? Because that's also important. Because if they think I'm holding ace king and there's an ace king on the board, they're probably going to fold to almost any bet that I make, and I'm not going to make a lot of money. But if they think I'm holding garbage right now, and I actually have 2 pair, then I'm going to make a lot of money. So it turns out that when you actually, so for the longest time, so we call this decomposition. So in perfect information games, almost all of the powerful algorithms are built on decomposition. It means that we can solve individual states separately without thinking about their context in the broader game. In poker, we could never do that. That's why we solved games and stored them in a table, because we had to think about all the situations and how they related to each other. Up until 2014, and we discovered how you could do decomposition in imperfect information games, so in extensive form game trees. And the answer, the thing you have to keep track, there's one thing you have to keep track of about history. You don't have to remember all of history. You don't have to tie all the information sets together of how you're going to make decisions. But you do have to remember one thing, and it turns out it's the counterfactual values, the exact thing that we were storing regret with respect to. You have to remember them for the players, for all the players. I'll do it in poker terms. For any pair of cards the other player could have, I have to keep track of what's their sort of opportunity cost. It turns out it's a counterfactual value of what else they could have done to have made money in this game if they didn't play to reach here. What were their options? They could have folded here and then gotten X money with this set of cards. Or they could have raised here and how much could they have done? And if you can keep track of that, then you can solve a state independently from everything else. So this was a huge breakthrough.
By summing over all the cards that they might have, or
you actually have to make what you end up doing is you make a tiny little game where they get the choice. You offer them all those opportunity costs over again. You basically say, oh, I'm going to pretend like, yes, you had a chance of, if you were holding aces right now, here's what you could have done if you made an alternative decision. I'll offer that to you as one decision. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to get dealt cards, and I'm going to say, do you want to take your opportunity cost, your counterfactual value for this, or do you want to play the game with me? And the answer is, by giving them that decision, they recreate the proper distribution they're supposed to have.
Whatever it happens to be for their strategy, for their thing. Wow.
And so it turns out that these counterfactual values appear very fundamental, and I think even the exact degree that they're fundamental, we're still discovering. There's elements in multi-agent reinforcement learning that counterfactual values are finding their way into it. So I think the story for counterfactual values isn't even done yet.
So are you saying that this approach allows you to collapse the he thinks, I think, he thinks, I think?
Yes.
Recursion?
That's exactly what it is.
Into a single question, and there must be something that's giving you that leverage where there isn't going to be some incredible nonlinearity at the he think, I think 28 lines times deep.
So let me jump into the last piece of the poker history piece, which was okay. Let's actually, can we actually do no limit? Can we take on professional poker players at no limit? And this decomposition piece was the focal point of it. Once we knew how to do decomposition, suddenly we got the ability to return to how everybody was doing AI in chess and Go and backgammon. Like, what's the standard approach? I'm gonna talk about it at a high level in chess and Go. You would arrive at a state. You would do some search from that state. You couldn't search to the end of the game because, of course, the game's too big. So you would stop at some point and you would use some either heuristic value or more recently a learned value, and then you'd cut off the search. And then Alpha Go and Alpha Zero had this clever way of biasing the search to more promising directions. And there's other things you can do, but at its heart was consider this position in isolation, do a search, cut off the search depth, and use a value function. We couldn't do that in poker because we couldn't solve that. That whole premise is decomposition. The whole premise is I can solve this little situation independently from the rest of the game.
Right.
And my value function depends on decomposition too, because it has to tell me in this position, what's the value independent of how you got there. Now that we know how to do decomposition, we can actually do search while we play. And so we started building the first programs that didn't just have lookup tables. They would arrive at a particular position where a particular betting sequence happened. So now that bet you made of 1,312, that I exactly consider that bet, not some closeness to it. And then I'll actually do a search from there. And when I get to the edge of my search, what I'll end up having is beliefs. I'll say, here's the distribution of cards I would have at this leaf node. Here's the distribution of cards my opponent has. Now look up the value of how good it is to be in that situation. Now that's a hard value. It's very hard to build a heuristic out of that. We could do piece heuristics in chess and backgammon. How do we build a heuristic out of this distribution versus this distribution? But that's where learning comes in. So then we appealed to what was modern at the time. We're going to learn that. We're going to learn something that if you give it two distributions, and I tell you how the betting has gone up to now, tell me what you think the value of that position is for those two players, and that allows us to do search because we've recovered decomposition.
Wow! And so when you're doing this search during the actual tournament, during the
we got to actually use a computer while we played.
And so that search is more self-play. It's not like the search is using a different model of the person across the table from them.
I think the way to think about it is that much like AlphaGo or Deep Blue, it does not build a model. It does not respond. It is responding to what they're doing, but it is responding to what they're doing by sort of, you can kind of imagine, I could, in Deep Blue, we could have written down a table. We could run a search from every single position and write down a table that is the result, and then it would play from a table. But instead of doing that, because we don't have the memory, why don't we just use some compute on the fly and trade off memory for time? And that's the way to think about this. I can't store to the 10 to the 160 table. So instead, I'll recreate parts of the table as I need it through
the actual part of the table that's relevant right now.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow. Super cool.
And then in late 2016, we got 40 different poker pros. They each played 3,000 hands. We asked them to play 3,000 hands. There was a prize for whoever did the best against Deep Stack was the program, as we called it. And
because everything has to be deep right now.
Are we revolving out of deep by now?
It was a very clever name, though. Deep Stack is a pun on if you're a poker player that there's deep stack tournaments or like shallow stack tournaments. So
it's already an expression. Yeah. So it was okay. That works on multiple levels. That's good.
Nolan Bard takes credit for that pun. So
and how did they do? How did all these 3,000?
So remember that 4,000 number when I said that's how bad our bots are? They're not that bad. It turns out humans are much better poker players. They were losing about 400 big blinds per hand. So 750 is the number if they just decided let's not play and fold every hand. So they're doing better than that.
Yeah, okay.
But they it turns out that maybe humans aren't here. Actually once we figure out how to do this, maybe humans still have a lot to learn.
All right. Well, so moving from poker for a second, or maybe permanently, I was curious about a couple other things that you've worked on. You have this great sort of strategic perspective on decision making, and one of the things that you did is you designed a class that you teach at University of Alberta where people actually design games in the class. So it's the problem not of figuring out how to solve a particular game, but how do you make a game that's interesting, fun, good, like worthwhile. What have you learned from that? Are you still running a class like that?
I am. I'm still running that class. It's almost certainly my favorite class I've ever gotten to teach or design and run, and so I hang on to that as long as I can. I mean, the first thing I learned was just a reminder that I have loved games since my childhood, and I seem to bend everything towards that, whether it's teaching or whether it's research. But I think it has been interesting. It has been interesting how much, I don't actually spend a lot of time, my research comes out of this from game theory, and I teach a class on game theory in that class because I think it's useful to know and it's sometimes a tool. But I think one interesting thing is just how little I think the mathematics help you discover what makes a game interesting. I don't know. Have you guys ever heard of the game 3 to 15?
Don't know.
Okay, so the way the game works, it's a 2-player game. The way it works is you choose numbers. The numbers are 1 to 9, and you're each going to claim a number in turn. So you can choose the number 2, and then the next person, now that's off the table. The next person has to pick a different number, like 7, and you're going to keep alternating choosing numbers. And if
I do know this game, just not by that name. I've used it in my intro class as well.
I don't know it. So how does it work?
The goal, the win, is if you can get 3 numbers together who sum to 15, then you have won the game.
3 numbers. Okay.
Okay, so that's, you just play, and it might be the case that you've claimed all 9 numbers and no one has 3 numbers that sum to 15, and then it's a draw and you repeat. Did you know that game actually is tic-tac-toe? So if you put the numbers into a magic square,
right,
then all the diagonals and sums sum to 15. Those are the only things that sum to 15. And so you're playing tic-tac-toe. One of those games is distinctly more enjoyable than the other.
Oh, interesting.
Because you're playing on your spatial reasoning versus your ability to think about arithmetic. I'm sure there's some people who love the arithmetic version of it. But for a lot of people, that would be terrifying to them, that the spatial representation of it is what gives enjoyment out of tic-tac-toe. So how we present the game to humans is something we don't think too much about in the
right, because they're isomorphic mathematically, but it actually matters when it's people using their wetware to make these decisions.
Yeah. And maybe it would matter if we where this matters for AI is probably in representation. And often we don't think about that as the AI part of the algorithm. We think about that as somehow handed to us, like here's the representation of the board. But if you think about it, the way AlphaZero plays Go is it's handed the board in these sort of as matrices of layers of positions of stones. If you hand it in a different configuration, that's much like this 3 to 15 versus tic-tac-toe.
Right. And they're putting convolutional layers on top of that spatial layers, which makes that stuff critically matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. For what it's worth, in the class where I talk about that, I also invented like 4 other games that are isomorphic to tic-tac-toe. One is like a Pokemon variant where I actually printed up Pokemon cards to give out to the class, and another one is like you have to make an outfit where the different things match. But they were all tic-tac-toe. This
awesome.
Is to get people thinking
Can you share
abstractly.
this with me? This is not the time for me to ask you that, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
So, okay, well, that's awesome. So in the class, you guys have to think about those other attributes. It's not just the mathematics of, it's just a game tree. It's actually how do you present it so that people receive it in a way that is engaging to their cognitive machinery, right?
That's right. And then one place that I think it's spun back around, I would say, is one of the things we think about in that class is sort of sub-goals and progress. Like one of the things that really tantalizes you and when you're playing a game is this feeling that I'm getting closer. Like I know what I have to do and I can feel myself making progress, whether that's I'm taking away the opponent's pieces in chess, or I'm getting my pieces closer to the home row inside of backgammon. Like there's these feelings of progress, and you can set yourself up for these little mini goals as you go, and these give you little jolts of excitement when you achieve them. And I think that's also not something, like I think that has something to tell us back inside of as we build our AI systems of I think we often do that as humans naturally without the game telling us that. The game doesn't reward us for those steps. It still says the win is when you get all your pieces off the board before your opponent. But we create sub goals for ourselves and then reward ourselves for them. And this gives us, I think, a lot of learning gradient. And I think this is an important this has an important observation to play for AI.
That ought to exist somewhere inside the nets. There should be something that you could inception, deep dream, reverso, and find those intermediate goals. They should be represented in there somewhere, you'd think, if the thing is actually playing well.
Yeah, and some element maybe it is, like value functions kind of do that for you. They sort of say this is a good, like I'm likely to win from this state, so then I feel good when I get to it. But it doesn't feel like that feels still quite a bit different. I feel like humans are, my best and favorite word for this is they're playing. Like when we say we play games, like it does mean we're doing the act of engaging in this game, but we're doing something else that's far more, it is playful. It is, we know the game doesn't mean anything, so we're going to try things and we're going to discover things and reorient ourselves in this little world. I don't think our agents do that. Right, our agents, they're told accumulate reward. This is just as important as eating to them. They're not. I don't think our agents yet play games, despite the fact that we make them do that.
Well, or the agents don't have any sense of reality, so it's all just a game.
Yes,
and that's all they can do. Whereas with a person, you think, well, if I stick my hand on the stove, I'm going to have a reward. I don't like that, but I can play the hand on stove game. And
I would argue that the hand on stove game is not a game.
You don't know the rules. You're so bigoted. But yeah, no.
I want to say that there's a distinction here. I think humans play, and there's a legitimately different thing. It's not they're not all the same of accumulating reward. I think play is a different mode that humans operate in. And there's a whole literature around. Maybe this is a piece that differentiates humans. Maybe play is an important part of intelligence, and without it, we wouldn't be what we have.
I haven't gotten to read it yet, but the cover story of this month's Scientific American is animals playing, elephants, apes, dogs.
And maybe I should be more careful to say that things that we often classify as intelligent have this property as well too.
Right. That's. We'll put it this way. To me, that sounds like a good argument for making social good out of game research, AI game research, and taking it via the value that humans or whatever living systems get out of play. Is precisely that game-like aspect of it, that the stakes are limited, the bounds, the downside is limited, so you can go ahead and try things out that you couldn't try out if you were actually confronting a real stove. or whatever it might be, like that. So that's cool.
Yeah, I also think if we saw more of our AI systems playing, I think it would take some of the edge and fear off for those who don't really follow what these things are doing. I think it would, I mean, humanize is maybe going too far, but I think it would help us see, I think, these AI systems as less cold and calculating and something more relatable.
I mean, I think that's something that's true of your old robots playing tag video, right? Where it's like the fact that they're not like the scary version of the robot tag is like there's the robot and then the other one goes and it just like crushes it, right? But actually what you see is they're doing the sorts of things that we do. They're trying to fake each other out. Occasionally it fails, right? So they try to do a dodge but they get caught anyway, and it becomes very relatable. And it seems like that's sort of what you're getting at, that these programs that are, you know, grappling with the same things that we're grappling with makes them seem more like us.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, on the other hand, you know, looking at our cats playing, sometimes it's pretty terrifying. But I mean, I think it's absolutely right that play is not optional. It's a cognitive mechanism that has reasons for being there, and that would help us to see that more broadly, to look out in the world and see it more broadly, to see it in machinery, to see it in obvious machinery, would help see the more unifying principles of animals and humans and machinery, that we're all, you know, kind of doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I wanted to bring up one last topic in the negative time remaining.
Great. It's not me.
It's not Dave this time. Dave tried to land the plane, and I was like, "But can we go one more time?" And that is that I think a lot of people are drawn into game research because they're very competitive and they want to see, okay, can I make a thing that crushes everybody else? And that's really all that matters, is who can you crush? And one of the things about your research that really I find inspiring is that you also got drawn into cooperative games. So for you, the playing is really the interesting thing. It's not necessarily beating others. It's like, can you work together in this case? Can you do the game-like things? It doesn't have to be to defeat. It can be also to help. And so what's the status of that kind of work for you?
Well, let me say, I think this got coupled with my own, I think, personal excitement around cooperative games. And I think, you know, a gaming group that I meet regularly with and play weekly with, we started playing more cooperative games for exactly, I don't know, I think there was a certain sense of like, there's a different kind of rush around, you know, not showing yourself better than somebody else, but us together collaborating to pull something off.
So for people who haven't seen these, could you name like one or two games that are in this space?
Sure. The one I'm going to talk a little bit more about when it comes to AI is Hanabi. So this is actually a card game where everybody gets to see your cards but yourself. It's sort of the inverse of most card games. Another game that's actually more recent, The Crew, is a trick-taking card game, like if you've played Spades or Bridge or something like that. And it's a cooperative trick-taking card game, which is kind of crazy to think about. You're actually all on the same team trying to achieve a certain goal together as you take tricks.
And Hanabi is sort of like cooperative distributed solitaire in a sense, right? Because you're trying to play all the cards down. So if people aren't familiar with the game, that's kind of, it maybe gives them the flavor of what it's like.
That's right. You are planning to play 1 to 5 and 5 colors jointly, as you all have cards in your hand, except for you can't see your cards. So when it's your turn, you could play one of them, but you don't know what it is. But the other thing you can do is tell people about what cards are in their hand. And the cleverness of this game revolves around not just telling people things about their hand so they know when to play them, but realizing that the fact that they didn't tell you something is also telling you something. The fact that they chose to tell you that a card was red is more than them telling you the card is red. They could have said any number of things. The fact that they chose that one tells you more than the thing they told you. And so it becomes this very... it becomes this very cerebral, like you have to get in your teammate's head and try to understand what do they see of the world. I felt like as I played this game, I felt like I was becoming more empathetic. Like empathy is built into this game in some sense. Like you have to imagine what is that other player seeing? What is their life experience in the more general case? But what is their individual experience of what they see with their cards? Because they see what you see some degree. Like you overlap. We all get to see everybody else's cards. But you get to see mine, and I get to see yours, and you're not.
I see, right?
We're not
so
seeing each other.
because saying it's red might be particularly surprising because we all look at everybody else's and we see tons of red out there. So I would normally expect I don't have a red, but you're telling me I've got a red. Oh, something like that.
There's crazy moves where you can do things like that are totally interpretable. Where I can point to the person who doesn't go next. I can point to the next person and say, by the way, this card here, it's red. Because you can only tell them what color it is or what number it is. You can't say both. And it turns out, usually what happens if someone tells you a card is red, the only reason for them to tell you that is because they want you to play. Right? You quickly realize that's what these things mean. You don't wait for the person to tell you, oh, and also it's the red 3, and now you know that we need the red 3. Like if I told you it's red, it's probably because it's the 3. But you can do this where you can point to someone else and say, that card's red. And the person who goes after you looks over and says, wait a minute, that's not the red 3, that's the red 4. If you play that now, we're going to miss because we need the red 3 first. Why would you tell me? Why would you tell them that? You just made a horrible mistake. And one of the rules we have in our play group is if somebody looks like they made a mistake, don't think they made a mistake. Think that they're talking to you. They know something and you don't know it. It would make perfect sense if you did. Now figure out what that is. And the answer you come to is, I can fix this. I have the red 3. Well, which card of mine is the red 3? And you might even be able to figure that out, what it is. And they only did that move because they knew you would figure out which of your cards is the red 3, and you'd play it without them even having to tell you.
Wow. That seems like a hard game.
It is only like $9. So find this game and find some people.
And what is it?
Hanabi.
I think it means fireworks.
Okay.
It does mean fireworks in Japanese. Ostensibly, you're creating a firework display, but that is
doesn't matter. Yeah. Wow.
So there has been some AI research in this to actually how do we build programs that do this. I think we're at the point that if you just wanted to do self-play, if you just wanted to have agents that knew, like they would design a strategy that if they got to play in every position, so not to get to see anything they shouldn't get to see, but just that they knew their strategy was getting to play everywhere, that they can perform maybe even superhuman. It's a little bit harder to figure out what a good human score is, but they're very, very good. But they also do very, very weird things. Like you thought,
so they can't play with people.
Yeah, and so there's been some work on how do we build things that can play with people? How do we build things that can figure out how people play? Like not just that they're better equipped to play with people, but like, if I sit down with people I've never played before, I could watch them play half a game probably and sit down and be ready to go. Like we wouldn't be as coordinated as my game group, who we've played so much together. I can, I know how they're thinking and what they're likely to do. But like I can get a gist of what it is that they do and how they think about things just from watching them play. I found it interesting when we were looking at early bots playing. I got to do the same thing there, and I could do the same thing. I could be like, oh, that moves, like, why would you do that? And then I'd sort of back up and like, look, what did you know that meant you could play that card? And you could sort of decipher, oh, they would do these weird things. Like instead of saying red because the red card is playable, they would say red and it meant the card you just drew is playable. So it was a little bit more convention-y.
Right.
You could start to figure out what they
were. Like duplicate bridge conventions, bidding conventions, that could be anything, but it's better if it can sort of be riding two tracks at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's what I think humans do a lot, and the computers just kind of didn't care about that. They would just build the conventions and know what to do. But if you're going to try to play against others, then you need to have it sort of grounded in what makes sense and not just pure convention. So I think there's been some progress in that space, and it's definitely kicked off quite a bit of work around, I would say, cooperative AI in general, but also this sort of there's been a line of ad hoc teamwork before, but I think this is a re-envisioning of it. What happens when not everybody has the same view of the world, which changes the problem. Much in the same way that poker changed the problem compared to chess, this changes the problem for cooperative games. I think one thing you said, I'll just throw at the end of it, is one of the reasons I was also drawn to this was kind of what you said. There's a lot of AI stories around, we built a program that crushed humans at Go. We built a program that crushed humans at StarCraft. And these all are marketed. They're great. They are exactly what they purport to be. They're great milestones in our progress. We're building more competent AI and doing this. But it would be really nice to have some stories where we build a program that can be a teammate with humans better than even other humans can be. Like we still crush them, but we're going to crush them in a way that makes everybody happy.
Yeah, well, and there was a human on the team that was doing the crushing.
That's right. That's right.
Wow. Oh, very cool.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining in and having a chat with us. It's really inspiring thinking about how games can actually help us be more empathetic and understand computation better and just maybe even be better people. So thanks for all the cool work that you've done.
Oh, thank you. This was a super fun chat. I'm glad you invited me on.
This was Computing Up. Thanks for listening.